Tantor Audio, a division of recorded books, presents It Started with a Kiss by Ella Quinn, narrated by Cat Gould. Chapter 1. Early morning, Hyde Park, May 1815. Dawn had broken only a few minutes before, but a light fog clouded the air, making the sun look like a small yellow ball. Gideon, Duke of Rothwell, was certain he was the only rider at this hour of the morning. Needing the calm a hard ride gave him, he thundered down the empty carriageway. Suddenly, from out of nowhere, a dark bay burst through the mist, disturbing his solitude. Yet it was the massive dog, almost the size of a pony, keeping pace with the horse that caught his notice. What the devil? Feizu, his black Merguez stallion, pranced nervously as Gideon brought him to a halt. "Easy, boy. We don't need that beast tangling with you. He could sever your hamstrings in an instant." A moment later, a twist of long dark hair pulled loose from under the rider's hat riveted his attention on the woman. By the time she was even with him, he'd taken in the neat figure encased in a dark blue riding habit, and her excellent seat. She glanced over, slowing her horse for a bare moment as she passed him. Her cheeks were pink from the cool air, and a smile graced her lush rose lips. Their gazes collided and held, as if they were the only two people on earth. In that second, when Gideon felt as if he would tumble into the vivid blue of the rider's eyes, they reminded him of Lapis. She cannot be real. He blinked, and she was gone. He might have dreamed her, except that a few seconds later, a groom raced by, clearly attempting to catch up with his mistress. For a moment he was tempted to follow as well, but it wouldn't do him any good. She was obviously a lady, and even if he could obtain an introduction, and their relations proceeded satisfactorily, he was not yet in a position to wed. It was pure fantasy to think of marriage in conjunction with a woman he'd seen in passing. Still, he would have liked to have been able to dream. "Blast, father! If you were still alive, I'd shake some sense back into him." But the old Duke had been in the ground for over 3 months when Gideon had returned from Canada. Now all he could do was pick up the pieces his father had left behind. "Come on, boy." Shaking the blue-eyed image from his mind, he urged Feizu to a trot. "It's time to go back. As long as I'm here, I may as well gather information and settle some accounts." He should never have left. The waste was his fault. Had he stayed home, none of the damage would have occurred. What was the old saying about reaping what one sowed? Well, it was now his job, his alone, to restore the dukedom's holdings to what they had been only a few years ago, before he'd left for the colonies and played at being a backwoods man. Unfortunately, those experiences would not help him bring back and modernize his holdings. 15 minutes later, as he rode up to the stables in the mews behind his townhouse, he surveyed the building, searching for any signs that it would soon need to be repaired. When he'd returned from Canada, his first shock was discovering his father had died. A letter had been sent, but it hadn't arrived before he left the colonies. The second shock was the poor condition of the estates. It baffled him that the once prosperous properties could fall into such disrepair in such a short period of time. If only he knew what had occurred to make his father neglect his holdings when he'd prided himself on them in the past. To make it more baffling, no one at Rothwell Abbey could explain, to Gideon's satisfaction, what had occurred to change his father. If only he had remained at home, where he belonged, instead of hieing off across the ocean. This was a lesson not to allow others to tend to his responsibilities. He really did not have time for this bolt to town, but his cousin, Edmund Bentley, had written, begging for Gideon's help, and here he was. "Your Grace." Barnes, his stable-master, strode quickly to Feizu's head, taking hold of the harness. "I've got him now." "How's the roof?" Gideon asked, as he swung off the horse. In the short time he'd been home, he had learned to ask, No one, it seemed, wanted to volunteer information. "I want the truth. It is much easier to fix a small leak than the damage it can do."
"Try so far, your Grace. I'll keep an eye out. The glazing's coming off from around some of the windows."
If that was the worst of it, Gideon would count himself lucky. It would take time and patience to make the repairs on the buildings that had been neglected, but he'd be damned if he'd allow anything else to fall into disorder.
"Make arrangements to have them repaired." "Yes, your Grace. Going to be here long?"
the man asked, a hopeful look on his weather-beaten face.
"A few weeks, perhaps less. There is a deal to do at Rothwell and some of the other estates." "Bad doings, all of this."
The older man tapped the side of his nose.
"I'll make sure the town coach is in good order then. Won't do to have it break down when you need it, or looking shabby."
"If it's the same one I remember, it probably needs to be replaced." Gideon's tone was even grimmer than he felt, which was quite grim enough.
"It's got another couple of years yet."
The stable master started to lead Fei Zhu into his stall and stopped.
"Leave it to old Barnes."
"Thank you." Gideon hoped he'd conveyed the gratitude he had for his old retainers. They truly were gems. Without their loyalty and patience, his life and the lives of his family would be much more difficult.
"Now that you're here, what are you planning on doing with the new carriages the old Duke ordered from Hatchett's?"
New carriages? He fought to keep his jaw from dropping. What the deuce had his father been thinking? Although that bit of unnecessary extravagance went along with the other information he was slowly piecing together about the old Duke's recent behaviour. Spending that left little with which to maintain the estates.
"Got a landau and a high-perched phaeton."
"The devil you say! His father wouldn't have seen 70 again. What was he going to do with a phaeton?" Barnes flushed.
"I think it was for that high flyer he took up with."
Gideon's breath stopped. His parents had been the most devoted couple he knew. What could have happened to make his father change so drastically? And why in God's name had no one written to Gideon asking him to return home? Damn his eyes! It needed only that. Frustration coursed through him. He raked his fingers through his hair, knocking off his hat in the process. Yet, somehow, this fit the fractured story he'd heard, or rather, had not heard, about father's death. It was probably the reason Mamma had been so tight-lipped. No one had or would explain what exactly had happened to make the Duke ignore his holdings as he had. Thank God most of the assets were entailed, or Gideon might have found them mortgaged to the hilt, at best, or sold.
"Do you happen to know who this bark of frailty was?" "Her maid called her Mrs. Rosamond Petrie."
Barnes spit as he said the name.
"Like she was royalty and should be treated as such. Nothing more than a whore, if you ask me."
His stable master might not know much about the woman, but Gideon would make sure he found out not only exactly who the female was, but what, if anything, he could recover from her. Then a thought he did not want to consider occurred to him.
"I was told he died in town."
Barnes picked up Gideon's hat where it had fallen, running his hand around the brim for a moment before saying,
"Died in bed, he did, with her."
"Here?" He eyed the older man sharply. "At Rothwell House?" Not looking up, the stable master nodded slowly.
"For the love of Jove! What had father been thinking?" "Don't no one know that, your Grace,"
Barnes said quickly, as if he would be blamed for the old Duke's indiscretions.
"I got her out of there with no one the wiser, excepting for 2 of the grooms and Mr. Fredericks. Those that works here know which side their bread is buttered on. Won't no one be carrying tales?"
He made an X over his heart.
"Strike my name from my ma's Bible if they do. Mrs. Boyle even had the mattress changed out, said it was full of wickedness."
Gideon didn't think that a mattress could have a wicked nature, but he was just as glad for the new one. He would likewise swear that his mother had a good idea where her husband had been when he'd gone to his maker.
"I'm sure you did everything necessary." "Yes, your Grace. I'll get them windows fixed. What about that Mrs. Petrie's horses and carriage she's got here?"
He spared Barnes with a hard look.
"I would greatly appreciate it if you would tell me everything at one time. How many horses, carriages, and what not? Did my father buy them, or were they hers before he became involved with her? Please feel free to add any other information you believe necessary as well."
The stable master rubbed his nose as he thought. Finally, Barnes replied,
"The old Duke bought her a nice Arabian hack, and 2 dark bay high steppers for the phaeton he bought her a couple of years ago."
"Matched!" Gideon could barely spit out the word. The servant looked at him as if he'd gone mad.
"Wouldn't have expected anything else from his Grace, would you? Now if I can finish, your Grace."
Clenching his jaw, he gave a curt nod. Not that it mattered how much more there was. It would all be sold as soon as possible. He calculated the costs of the horses alone to be at least £3,000. Father had never stinted on horseflesh. Gideon turned his attention back to Barnes, who was still reciting his father's purchases over the past 3 years.
"Sell it all. I was about to get to the saddles another tack," the older man said in an aggrieved tone. "Keep the horses I brought with me, and whatever you think best for the town coach. The rest goes. What about the curricle? Won't get much for it, and you might need it."
He could use a sporting carriage. It would certainly save money in hackneys.
"Very well, I'll keep it, but contact Tattersall's and whoever else you need to about the carriages and other items."
Barnes opened his mouth again.
"Keep anything you think I shall require. Thank ye, your Grace."
Stanwood House, Mayfair. "Measles?" Lady Louisa Vivers exclaimed. "All 3 of them?" Excited to tell someone about the gentleman she'd seen in the park, she had gone directly to the parlour she shared with her friend and new sister, Lady Charlotte Carpenter. Just before the season began in earnest, Matt Worthington, Louisa's brother, had married Lady Grace Carpenter. Grace had guardianship of her 7 brothers and sisters. The marriage had given Louisa a total of 10 brothers and sisters, including her own 3 sisters, not including Grace. Sometime this coming winter, the number of children would increase to 12, with the arrival of Matt and Grace's first child. The girls were ecstatic to be aunts. Even the boys were excited. However, as Louisa opened her mouth to speak, Charlotte told her of the doctor's diagnosis. Obviously that news took precedence over Louisa's. "Yes," Charlotte replied. "Theo, Mary, and Philip, according to Cousin Jane, and the information your mamma left for Grace, the others, including Grace and Matt, have already had them. Will that put off Grace and Matt's trip to Worthington?" The addition of so many family members meant that not only Worthington House, but the Worthington main estate as well, must undergo extensive renovations in order to accommodate everyone. In fact, the only one of her brothers and sisters not residing at present in the Carpenter town home, Stanwood House, was Charlie, Earl of Stanwood, who was at Eton. Even Louisa's mother and her new husband, Richard, Viscount Wolverton, would stay at Stanwood House for the rest of the season, while Worthington House was being renovated. Well, after they returned from their wedding trip to Richard's estate in Kent, of course. Fortunately, the 2 houses were directly across Berkeley Square from each other. "I think they must go," Charlotte said, sitting at the desk. She tapped the feather end of the quill against her cheek. "Renovations must be started in the schoolroom there, if we are all going to reside at your family's estate after the season." Louisa and her sister were almost halfway through their first season. This new development certainly complicated things. Chewing her bottom lip, she began to mentally adjust her plans to account for the new development. I suppose we should write notes excusing ourselves from the entertainments we had planned to attend." She glanced at the writing table. What a bother. Why did the children have to choose now to fall ill? Charlotte let out a peal of laughter, lightening the mood. "That is almost exactly what Matt said." Louisa grinned. "What did Grace say?" "She told him he should ask and see what the children said. Grace is making arrangements for our chaperonage in the event he still wishes to make the trip. Charlotte heaved a sigh. The poor things. I remember having the measles. The worst part was when I began to feel well again and was still not allowed to leave the sick room. I wish Charlie was here to help entertain them. I shall, of course, help with nursing. As shall I. Louisa picked up her pocketbook from the desk. We should make a schedule that will allow us to attend our entertainments and help care for the children. She ducked as Charlotte threw a small embroidered pillow at her. You and your schedules. How else do you plan to accomplish our marriages? By the way, how is it going with Harrington? Charlotte's lips formed a mew. Not as I wish it to. He appears to think he has jumped all his hurdles. Consequently, he has gone off to his estates for a week. She raised a brow. I can only imagine he thinks me a sure thing. That won't do at all. Louisa was not happy about that bit of information. Charlotte deserved to be treated better. If he ignores you now, imagine what he would be like as a husband. My thoughts exactly, Charlotte agreed. I do like him, yet I shall not be taken for granted. I think I must strike him as a potential husband. I cannot say that I blame you. Louisa wandered to the table next to one of the sofas and placed her hand on the cold teapot. Will you ring for another pot while I change? Charlotte nodded absently. I have finally decided what to do about Lord Bentley. Louisa gave her friend a wicked grin. You must help me find a match for him. Edmund, Marquis of Bentley, heir to the Duke of Covington, had been one of the first gentlemen Louisa had met this season, and despite the hints she had dropped, her most persistent suitor. Nothing she had done thus far had convinced him that they were not suited. Her sister went off into whoops. Several moments later she pulled out her handkerchief and wiped her eyes. That is the best idea you have had yet. If he transfers his affections to another lady, you will have managed to rid yourself of him without hurting his feelings. Indeed. The only problem is, who? She must be intelligent enough to be Duchess, managing enough to ensure Bentley performs his duties, and possess a great deal of patience in order to deal with his dithering. Louisa could not help but to grimace, a virtue I do not possess in abundance. More patience than you? Charlotte's tone was serious, but the corners of her lips twitched. That does sound like an almost impossible combination. She would have to be a perfect paragon. Ignoring her sister's facetious comment, Louisa said, If we are still attending the ball this evening, we can begin searching for her. She paused for a moment, her fingers on the door latch. It will not be an easy task, yet I am sure we will succeed. I'll see you in a few minutes. We are going to the ball. Charlotte called after Louisa. Will you do me a favour and tell Matt I was about to change my shoes, but you are already dressed. Their brother continued to use his study at Worthington House, saying that even with the construction it was quieter than Stanwood House. And smelling of the stables. Hold off on the tea, and I shall go straight away. Making her way down the stairs, Louisa strode out of the house and crossed Berkeley Square. Chapter 2. A few minutes after leaving the stables, Gideon entered the house through the garden door, quickly making his way up the corridor to the hall and the main staircase. A letter on the round heavy oak table caught his eye. It had to be from his cousin Bentley. No one else either knew he was in town or expected him to be. Gideon should probably thank his cousin. If it had not been for him needing help with an as-yet unknown emergency, he'd never have found out about what his father had been up to here. Drawing off his gloves, he picked up the missive and opened it. Rothwell. Seems strange to call you that, but I'll get used to it, I suppose. I hope you receive this soon. What I mean is, I hope you are already in town. There is a ball tonight at Lady Sale's, and I've arranged for you to receive a card. Not, of course, that you would be denied entry, but I thought it the best thing to do under the circumstances. I shall meet you there. Your cousin, Bentley. Gideon blew out an annoyed breath. How in the name of all that was holy was he supposed to help his cousin when the blasted man still hadn't told him what he needed? Even though he was several years older than Bentley, they had always been close, and Gideon would do what he could to assist, if he ever discovered what that was. He sincerely hoped Bentley either married a woman with sense or managed to develop some before he came into his father's title. Meanwhile, the ball was hours away, and Gideon could use that time to his advantage. Since arriving home, he had done a great deal of research on new methods of farming and increasing crop yields. Yet first, he must have a few words with his secretary. After that, he'd visit a friend. Less than 3/4 of an hour later, he knocked on the door of Worthington House. A stately butler opened the door, and Gideon handed him his card. Stone-faced, the servant bowed.
"Follow me, Your Grace."
Gideon stifled a grin. Matt, Earl of Worthington, had always bemoaned the fact that fate had given him a butler who refused to crack a smile or unbend in the least. Why that should bother him, Gideon had no idea. Most butlers were as stiff as boards and haughtier than dukes. Glancing around, he noticed that the house seemed strangely empty, and there were no carpets on the floor. Then a loud banging started. A few moments later, the door to Worthington's study opened.
"His Grace, the Duke of Rothwell," the butler said in a sombre tone. "Thank you, Thornton."
Worthington rose, coming out from around his desk.
"Rothwell, it's good to see you back. I believe my stepmother wrote our condolences. I am sorry for your loss."
Gideon held out his hand and his friend gripped it.
"Thank you. Father's dying was a shock, but what I discovered about the state of the properties and the other holdings was even worse. Thankfully, the majority of the estate is entailed. These days it seems as if entails and the daughters of wealthy merchants are all that is saving many families. Have a seat."
Worthington waved Gideon to a large chair near an empty fireplace.
"Tea will arrive shortly. However, I have wine and brandy if you'd prefer it." "Thank you. Tea is perfect."
The one thing he must do was keep his wits about him.
How can you work with so much noise? Believe me, the alternative is worse.
Worthington lowered his long frame onto a small sofa facing Gideon.
"I hadn't heard you were in town." "I arrived late yesterday. One of my family members asked for some assistance. I shan't be here long. There is too much work to do." "Is this strictly a social call?"
Worthington canted his head slightly.
"Or is there something I can do for you?"
The tea arrived as Gideon decided how much to tell his friend about the problems he faced. If he wanted the best advice he could obtain, there was no point in hiding everything. Yet he was reluctant to divulge too much information.
"Our conversation can go no further. If what I say to you gets out, it will make my predicament much worse."
Worthington lost his smile.
"Naturally, you may depend on me. I'll be blunt. When it comes to available funds, I'm pretty well rolled up. My father ran through the accounts as if he didn't have a care in the world. Fortunately, my steward was able to husband the resources he had at hand so that we have seed for planting, but it was at the expense of maintenance and improvements over the course of 3 years. Never a good idea to let repairs go," Worthington commented without expression.
Gideon nodded.
"I also need to change the way we've been doing things. My steward is a good man, but clings to the older ways. I've done some reading, but I've come for your advice as to which of the new methods are the best."
He grinned.
"Other than that, I am curious to see how you are adjusting to married life."
His friend's broad smile told him everything he wanted to know.
"If I had known how much fun it would be, I would have wed years ago."
Worthington raised a sardonic brow.
"Thinking of joining me?"
Gideon's thoughts went back to the lady on the horse he had seen earlier. Then he shook his head.
"I do wish to marry. It is my desire as well as my duty. Unfortunately, I am unable to offer for a lady until my finances are in better order." "You could marry an heiress."
Worthington tapped a pencil on his desk.
"That is a perfectly respectable method of recouping one's fortunes. particularly as you did not cause the problem in the first place. And shackle myself to a woman who cares only about being a duchess? Gideon grimaced. No, thank you. I want to be beforehand with the world when I take a wife, and I shall economize as much as I am able to make that happen. Fortunately, I have another year or two before my sisters come out. He rubbed the back of his neck before looking Worthington in the eye. It might be stupid of me, but I don't like the idea of using my wife's money to repair my estates. What a lady brings to a marriage ought to be used for children and her well-being. This is my problem. I'll take care of it. He refused to leave his wife dependent on the income of certain properties that would most certainly leave her destitute if they were not well managed. Giving himself a shake, he took a sip of tea. Not that he had to worry about marriage. He doubted if any lady would catch his interest, except perhaps a dark-haired one with a wonderful seat, a body to match, and eyes one could happily drown in. Yet the chances he would meet her were almost non-existent. Other than the ball this evening, he did not plan to attend any social events. The moment Louisa approached Worthington House, an eager footman opened the door, and the sound of hammering could be heard echoing from the upper levels of the house, where the schoolroom floor was being renovated. The servant bowed. "His lordship is in his study, my lady," which was almost the only reason she could have for being in her own family's house. "Thank you." On the other hand, she felt more at home in Stanwood House. After all, she had lived there longer. When Mamma had brought Louisa and her sisters to town, they had been in Worthington House for only a few weeks before Matt and Grace married, and the family moved to the carpenter's town home. It was nothing short of a miracle that they all got on so well. Louisa already loved Charlotte and her brothers and sisters like her own. The carpet runners had been removed during the renovations, and her boots made a hollow clicking sound on the hardwood floor of the corridor. She reached the door and knocked before opening it. "Matt?" A tall gentleman, with dark blonde hair and the loveliest grey eyes she had ever seen, stood and stared at her. She fought to keep her mouth from falling open. It is him! The same man she had seen not more than an hour earlier. A smile tugged at his well-moulded lips, and she answered with a smile of her own. "Louisa," her brother said as she dragged her gaze away from the other gentleman, "I would like to introduce you to the Duke of Rothwell. Rothwell, my sister, Lady Louisa Vivers." She stepped farther into the room, and he moved toward her. As she held out her hand, he bowed. "A pleasure, my lady." "Your Grace?" She sank into a deep curtsy. "The pleasure is mine." The moment his warm mouth touched her gloveless fingers, her knees wobbled, and she didn't even care that he should not have actually kissed her hand. Good heavens, that had never happened before. His molten silver gaze captured hers as it had earlier. "I insist you allow me to be the better pleased, my lady." For almost the first time in her life, Louisa was speechless. Fortunately, Matt cleared his throat before she could make a complete fool of herself. She gave her hand a tug, and the Duke slowly released his fingers, letting it go. "Matt," she said, sucking in a breath as she tried to still the rapid pace of her heart. It was all she could do to drag her gaze away from the Duke's, yet she finally managed to look at her brother. "I came to tell you we will be going to the ball this evening." "Yes, I thought we might be," he replied humorlessly. "I had hoped the measles might spare me the rest of the season, but Grace has other ideas." "What do measles have to do with a ball?" the Duke asked. "I have acquired not only a wife, but several children as well." Matt explained that before their marriage, Grace had been the guardian of her brothers and sisters, a duty he had now taken over. "The 3 youngest are ill, but not so badly off that we must cancel our engagements." Louisa glanced back at the Duke. "Will you be attending Lady Sale's ball?" "I shall be there." His eyes turned to silver as he gazed at her. "Would you honour me with a dance, my lady?" Mentally, she reviewed her dance card.
Bentley normally requested the supper dance, but if her plan to find him another lady were to succeed, she...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?